Our guest today is Steve Munatones. Steve Munatones is founder of the Open Water Swimming Association, the daily news of open water swimming, and Open Waterpedia. Over the years, Steve has competed in many open water swimming competitions across the globe and has earned a number of awards. Among them, in 2001, he was inducted into the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. Steve is also an engineer, a coach, an Olympic commentator, and an ambassador for the American Heart Association. Beyond this, Steve is an entrepreneur, having founded the company Katsu Global. Steve is also an avid writer, having covered all things related to swimming. He is the author of the book Open Water Swimming: Improved Performance for Swimmers and Triathletes, published in 2011. Last week, on April 30, Steve came in first in the yearly SCAR swim series in Arizona, which is the reason I've asked Steve to join me for this interview. For background, SCAR is a competition in Arizona of 4 swims across Lake Saguaro, a distance of 9.5 miles, Lake Canyon, a distance of 9 miles, Lake Apache, a distance of 17 miles, and Lake Roosevelt, a distance of 6.2 miles. To provide some perspective, this series of swims consists of a total of 41 miles, which is greater than the distance of an English Channel crossing or the distance of a Catalina Channel crossing. In each of these 4 swim races, swimmers are faced with unpredictable conditions: strong currents, wind, desert heat, cold and choppy water, and long distances, just to name a few. As full disclosure, I consider Steve to be one of my swim coaches and friends. I've trained with Steve before any number of times, although I've never, ever been able to keep up with him. Steve has the heart of a lion. He's capable of superhuman feats, and as far as I can tell, he is impervious to cold water, to harsh conditions, and to fatigue. Oh, and Steve is also a Harvard graduate. He speaks, reads, and writes Japanese fluently. Other than that, Steve is a perfectly normal guy. Steve, thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations on your SCAR swim series victory. It's a truly remarkable achievement.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you.
Okay, let's get down to it. I've prepared a number of questions for you, Steve. And first off, for those who may not know much about swimming, please explain for us, why do people each year enter the SCAR swim series in Arizona?
Okay, so the SCAR swim series was started by a criminal attorney named Kent Nicholas, and he lived near Phoenix, actually in a city named Mesa. Obviously, he's in the Arizona desert, but he had a dream to swim the English Channel, swim the Catalina Channel, and swim around Manhattan Island. So here he is with these big dreams to swim these famous channels and around New York City. And he was stuck on an inland state. So he scouted out 4 lakes near him that he thought would replicate, and they do replicate, the conditions that he would face in the English Channel and swimming across Catalina and around Manhattan Island. And so 10 years ago, 2012, he and I believe 5, perhaps 6 swimmers who had the same dream to swim across the English Channel, Catalina Channel, etc., set out on these 4 lakes. And it was very much like the Honolulu, the Hawaiian triathlon, the Ironman triathlon, where, you know, these people failed and it got promoted, and then other crazy people around the world says, hey, I want to do that. And it's been growing ever since. So that was the reason. Someone in the desert wanted to swim across the English Channel.
And why did you want to enter this swim series?
I wanted to challenge myself in something that I thought was unattainable. So I entered in November, about 6 months ago, beginning of November, and 61 people also entered, and they largely consisted of channel swimmers. Many of them have already swum the English Channel. Many of them had already swum across Catalina. And I have not done either of those. and I don't want to do it either of those, but I thought, here's a swim that's here's an event that's a real challenge. And I wanted to figure out how I could change my body, how I could, in the course of, having a family and business, how could I actually train myself both mentally and physically to do something that I thought in November of 2021 was unattainable. And so it was a challenge. It was a personal challenge that I wanted to see what I could do.
During these swims, Steve, what pace were you seeking? And by pace, I mean, was it a medium turnover, maybe a 2-beat kick, something slower, faster, perhaps?
Yeah, so I was aiming for a 1 minute and 20 seconds per 100 meters. That's about 1 minute and 15 seconds for 4 laps in a 25-yard pool. So for most people, that's fairly quick. It's fairly slow for an Olympic swimmer. I simply wanted to complete it. And I knew the water was cold, certainly cold at the start and cool throughout the race. So one of the goals I set for myself was I have to minimize the time in the water. That was the first thing. And so in order to minimize the time in the water, I had to swim fast. So that means my turnover was, meaning my arm strokes, was faster than 1 arm stroke per second. And my kick was, as you mentioned, about a 4-beat kick. So roughly, I was taking 1 arm stroke per second. And every 1 arm stroke I was taking, my feet would go up and down once. And I did that for a little over 16 hours in that 4-day period.
My goodness. What was the water temperature in each of these 4 lakes?
Well, for those of us who deal in the Fahrenheit world, the coldest point was 54 degrees. Now, it wasn't 54 degrees for a long period of time. Now, these 4 lakes, you actually swim from dam to dam. So you start at the south side, and you start at one dam, you swim to the end of another dam. The next day, you go to the next dam, etc. Always at the ends of the dams, the water was cold. And the reason why is at the dams, that's where they have either an outflow or an inflow of water. And remember, this water is snowmelt. The water comes or originates from the Rockies, I understand, as it flows down toward Mexico. But this is snowmelt. So even though we all know that Arizona is warm, the sun, fortunately, the sun it was a cloudless sky. But when the water goes in or out of a dam, there's an upwelling. So the water is pulled in and it goes up and down. So you got that cold water from the depths coming up to the top. And then as the water actually levels out as you swim further and further, then the upwelling stops and the water temperature probably is somewhere between 58 and 65 degrees. It depends on the lake. Now, I do recall the hardest swim was the 3rd day. And I definitely felt a difference in water temperature as my hand went under my body. So I asked my kayaker if he could take me to the edge of the lake where the water was more shallow. And I definitely felt, even though I was swimming a longer line, the water was warmer. So again, my goal was to finish, and I had to think of ways to finish. And if that meant I swam a longer distance, but I could do it in warmer water, that's what I was going to do.
And what was the visibility of the water in each of the 4 swims?
Well, it's fairly murky because the silt of the moving water kicked up. Most of the time I could see my hand from my elbow to my hand under the water, but it wasn't like we were swimming in a tropical paradise. It was definitely silty. It was fresh water, And in fact, when it got very windy, I swallowed some water, but it was refreshing water. It was reservoir water. So it wasn't like swallowing salt water here in the Pacific Ocean.
And for those of us who've never been to an event like this or competed in it, you're not swimming alone, are you? I mean, you are being accompanied escorted,
Yes.
and it's by someone in a kayak. Is that right?
Correct. So they had two forms of safety. One was your personal kayaker. I had a friend. He flew in from Boston. He's actually a swim coach, very experienced swimmer, which I wanted someone who is very capable, CPR trained, first aid. He knew first aid. So if something happened, he could attend to whatever emergency happened. And he paddled, kayaked right next to me. So we were parallel to each other. So that's one form of safety. That's what we call the first responder, if you will. But he literally was my eyes and ears. I couldn't see much. I certainly couldn't hear much. And I would just follow him. And I trusted him to swim on the straightest and shortest tangents, except for the aforementioned time when I wanted to swim in the shallow waters. And then they had safety boats that went from the slowest swimmer to the fastest swimmer. And there was about 10 of those. And I saw them probably once every 10 minutes. And they were the race officials, they were volunteers, they were other people who were just making sure that each swimmer was swimming safely. Now, 61 people entered the race, 48 people eventually started the race, and 15 finished. So at every point and every the 4 days, there were people that were getting out of the water. They were getting out of the water because of hypothermia. They were getting out of the water because they lacked the strength to fight the current. And so you needed this safety line. You needed athletes and kayakers were being picked up mid-race and taken to the shore or the headquarters.
You're out there in Arizona. Is known for having very hot temperatures and strong sun. Did you do anything to protect your skin during these 4 long swims?
Well, everybody got pretty tan. I probably turned a few shades of tan myself, but we did put on Desitin. Most of the athletes use Desitin. Desitin is the baby butt cream. It has a heavy or high percentage of zinc oxide, and it really coats your skin. So imagine swimming for hours on end. The longest swim that I did on those 4 days was 6.5 hours, but there were people in there close to 11 hours. So even though the water is cold to cool, but we're in a cloudless Arizona desert, and the sun was beating down on your back. So a lot of people put on this Desitin, this zinc oxide. It is basically white paint. And it stays on the skin for hours on end. If you put on your typical, copper tone suntan lotion, it's going to come off in maybe an hour or two, but the Desitin really protects the skin.
I don't have any experience with freshwater swims in lakes and dams. What type of currents did you face?
Oncoming. There's 2 ways, and this is also a very interesting part of open water swimming, or swimming in any open body of water. Now, in this particular case, it's a lake. I mean, it's a river, and it has been dammed up for decades. Well, the way that water is used by the agricultural industry, the municipal water programs, is either they release water from the dam, or either at one end or the other. And we meaning the race director and the swimmers, have no control over when that water is released. They release the water when the city of Phoenix and Tucson and Mesa needs water. And in one particular case, they were releasing water that was hitting us head on. And that was, think of swimming, it was basically swimming uphill, if you can imagine that. I was swimming as hard as I could, and the water was just hitting you. Think of cycling on PCH, and the wind is just blowing right into you. And that was in the first 500 meters. In that particular swim, there were people who just couldn't fight through it, and they were the ones who were stopped. But so we always were hitting oncoming currents, and then some of that was due to the directional flow of the water, and some of it was due to the wind. So 3 out of the 4 lakes, we had an oncoming wind, and it was, you could feel the resistance of the current against you. But that was the challenge. That was something that I had prepared for, and I prepared for it by swimming in Huntington Beach throughout the winter. And I purposely had swum through the surf zone to get my body and my mind, most specifically, accustomed to swimming against the current. And it worked out very well for me.
Which of the 4 lake swims was the most physically demanding?
Probably, well, day 2 was very demanding. It was the coldest I felt. And that one took me nearly 4 hours. But the start really wiped me out. That was when we were going in the oncoming current. I wear a Garmin watch, and my heart rate had gone up to 186 beats per minute for the first 10 minutes. And that's hard for a 59-year-old like me. And then after I got through that section, I still had 3 hours and 45 minutes to swim. So that was tough. And then the third day was also tough. That was the longest stretch, the longest lake. It's called Apache Lake. And I was in there for 6.5 hours, but there were people in there for almost 11 hours. And that's typically the toughest one because it's the longest. It's very narrow. So when the wind blows through the canyon walls, it's like you're swimming again you're literally up a creek without a paddle.
Steve, do you have any methods or approaches for training for long periods in cold water?
Yes, very simple. You train for long periods in cold water. It's not the human body is very adaptable, extraordinarily adaptable. So I did several things over the last 6 months to prepare myself to meet these physical challenges. One of them was I would swim in a pool in Long Beach for up to 3 hours and 15 minutes. That was just the maximum time I could spend in a pool, given pool hours and my work. And I made a point to never drink or never hydrate. I never stopped. I never had water. I never had electrolyte replacement fluids or anything. And I wanted my body to get used to, be acclimated to swimming or exercising for long periods of time without hydration. And initially that was very difficult. Imagine running for a marathon, for 3 hours without any hydration or anything, cycling. And so my body would cramp up in the beginning. But I also read and have learned that true dehydration in the human body is pretty remarkable. The human body is very resilient, and we can actually go for long periods of time, much longer than we actually imagine, in a dehydrated state. So gradually, my body adapted, and I was able to get through 3 hours of exercise without any, water or hydration. without cramping. And that's just one example of how the human body, if you can force yourself to get through a period of acclimatization, it can do some remarkable things. In terms of cold water, again, I started in November. Water was cold, and I just kept on swimming further and further distances. The last week I made a very, I changed my training slightly. I trained in Cabrillo Beach, which is by Palos Verdes. There's a big upwelling there, and it was cold. I absolutely dreaded. I live in Huntington Beach, and I drive. It's about 40 minutes to Cabrillo Beach, and for 40 minutes, all I could think about was cold water. And not a lot of people swim in the winter in Southern California, although some people think the water is warm. It actually is not. And when you have to do it by yourself, it requires you to be truly, truly committed. And I made a promise to myself, I would go to the ocean, and if I got to the parking lot, I would get in the water. It didn't matter what the conditions were. Now, sometimes I didn't swim as long as I thought. Sometimes I was able to swim longer than I thought. But these are things, whether you're a student studying for examination, whether you're a business person making a presentation, whether you're a budding author writing your first book, a filmmaker, filming your first documentary. Once you commit and you've convinced yourself that we're going to see this project or book or homework or swim to the end, the mind is very powerful, and it got me through the cold water. It got me through any doubts that I had in my mind, and I doubted myself frequently. And I listened to a lot of podcasts, a lot of people doing inspirational things. I just learned that the human spirit, resiliency, adaptability is much greater than we imagined. Because again, in November, there was no way I was going to do this. I was physically not capable of it. But come April, my body literally had changed. I was able to get into cold water without hyperventilating. And back in November, I would hyperventilate when I put my feet in the water, and I'd go to my knees and then to my waist and to my chest. The water was so cold, it took my breath away. I learned different breathing techniques from explorers, from people online. And I learned to control my heart rate, control my breathing pattern. And most importantly, you do that in your head, just like your students, your colleagues, and everybody who commits to something. Once you're committed, fully committed, and remember, in my world, a commitment didn't necessarily mean I was going to be successful. I was just committed to start. I wanted to finish, but I didn't know that I would finish until obviously I did, but I was committed to start. And I think that was the most important thing. And what I saw, the people who didn't make it, everybody didn't make it, and everybody did make it for various reasons. I just thought, when I was on the starting line with the rest of the athletes, that I felt confident enough that I was fully prepared to start. I didn't know if I would finish, but I was fully committed to starting and doing it with a positive mind. And fortunately, that pulled me through. Long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Oh, it was absolutely fascinating. Can you share anything about what you learned about breathing techniques when you're in cold water?
Yes. So just very controlled breathing instead of the shallow breaths that comes naturally. The longer breaths, inhaling deeply and fully exhaling really helps control the heart rate. And I would say to myself, okay, this is cold. but I'm going to have a warm shower in an hour or two or something. It was very interesting. There was a man who finished the swim. I think he ended up 5th or 6th. He's from Honolulu, and he's done the swim before, but he obviously has no opportunity to swim in cold water. Now, he did take ice baths. He did take cold showers throughout the winter. Well, winter is a relative term when you live in Honolulu, but he was in the boat with me. And when we jump in the water, he would say this mantra that really was impactful. He would close his eyes and he would tell himself out loud, cold, cold, cold. He would be telling himself that he's going to jump into cold water. And he did that 3 times. And then he jumped into the cold water. What he said when he rose to the surface was remarkable. He said, cold. It was like he was building himself up psychologically to realize this is going to be very cold water. But then when he did hit the water, he was saying, okay, I'm here. This is the element. This is the conditions that I have faced. This is what I expected, and it's not going to stop me. And he just put his head down and started to swim. I don't frankly know how he did it, but he did illustrate to me. I mean, he was standing right next to me. He jumped in right next to me. I heard what he said. He really demonstrated to me how powerful the mind is. Physiologically, he should not have completed that swim, but psychologically, he literally willed himself to face and overcome conditions that he shouldn't been able to do, but he did.
Steve, we noticed that the Roosevelt Lake swim took place at night. What is the reason for holding that event at night?
Okay. So Kent Nicholas, the attorney who started the swim, knows that when you swim the English Channel or Catalina, you will have a portion of the swim at night. And he wanted to replicate those conditions in his original vision. And so we started about, I would say 6:30 at night. So the sun was still up, low in the sky, but up. And we swam away from the shore. And I was laughing to myself. Usually you say, swim to the light, go to the light. And we were swimming away from the light. And when we got around the buoy, then it was as dark as you can imagine in the desert. There was no big city around. There was no LA. There was no San Francisco. We're way out there, and there was more stars in the sky that I could ever imagine, shooting stars. It was quite beautiful, but boy, it was pitch black. And having to swim in true darkness, so dark you could not see the hand in front of your face. But we all had glow sticks on our goggles, on our swim cap, and then we had glow sticks on the escort kayaks. And then they had a big spotlight at the start and finish of the swim, which was very interesting. Ted, you've swum in the ocean and around Naples and Long Beach before. And when you're swimming, you sort of look up and you see the finish. It's always difficult to judge exactly, am I 500 meters away? Am I 700 meters away? Am I 1 kilometer away? It's very difficult for the human eye to accurately judge. Well, at night, when all you see is a spotlight on the shore, well, the spotlight is the exact same size, whether you're 2 kilometers away or 20 meters away. I mean, it was amazing to me. And my kayaker who was on a kayak, Chris Morgan, he had a much better perspective. And he kept on telling me, okay, we're 2 kilometers away. Okay, we're 1 kilometer away. We're 500 meters away. We're 200 meters away. From my perspective, it was all the same. But in my mind, what I told him is he would stop and I would take some drink of water I also took some energy bars and other things along the way. And the first 2 hours of the swim, I asked him to stop every half an hour. And that was a good way for me to judge in darkness how far I had progressed. And then the last a little bit, I asked for 20-minute stops. And then I was so relieved when he said, okay, this is the last stop. You're going to get to shore before the last 20-minute stop. So I was, that was quite nice. But swimming at night in true darkness, that adds a different element of, some people call it scary. Some people like it. I particularly don't like it, especially in a body of water I had never been before. It wasn't I was afraid of sharks or jellyfish, because those don't exist in the lakes, but I was frankly afraid would I hit a rock? Would I hit something that both my kayaker and myself could not see? Fortunately, I didn't. I did hit rocks in the other lakes. Just like anything, there's, probably a boulder rolled down the hill one time, and I jammed my finger, but, I didn't break it. So it was just a little bit of a startle. I startled myself when I hit something hard under the water, and I couldn't see what it was.
To navigate amid that darkness, you just looked at Chris to your left or right?
That's it. That's the only thing I looked. Now, when he did say we're 2 kilometers away, I did look up, and I saw a white speckle in the distance. And then, okay, 2 kilometers. It doesn't look 2 kilometers to me. Because I saw the light. But I kept on swimming, and after half an hour, he said, oh, we're getting closer. I looked up. It was the exact same size, the exact same, candle light illumination level. And that was a little bit of a bummer. And so that was something also I told myself, don't look up. There's no need to look up, because it's going to be the exact same way. And that's another form of self-discipline. It was so tempting to look up, but I knew if I looked up, I would be disappointed, because the apparent or perceived distance would be the same. And so it was, an interesting example of the lack of what's the word I want to say? You couldn't see anything, you couldn't hear anything, and you were basically just swimming with your eyes closed.
Extraordinary. Steve, were there any mental approaches or tricks that you used to help you through the swims? I've heard some swimmers say that during long swims, they'll repeat songs in their head, or some will even try to solve math problems. What do you do?
I do the opposite. I don't want to think about things. And Ted, when we're swimming in a pool, together with our buddies, whatever, we're often stopping, every 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, etc. And we're joking, we're laughing, we're talking about the things. So typically when I swim, my mind is very active. Okay, what do I have to do today? Or what's my pace? Or gosh, I can't wait to eat breakfast, or it runs a gamut. I had to teach myself not to think, to create a void, a vacuum in my brain, to not think of anything and just let time pass. And for me, that was a very difficult thing to do. It was probably very similar, I guess, if someone's learning some form of a meditation, and you're trying to eliminate, thoughts and just go within yourself. Well, I didn't want to go within myself, but I didn't want to think of anything. And so sometimes when I would find myself drifting off into thought, purposeful thought, I brought myself back, and I would literally count my strokes to 100. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I would do it to 100. By the time I got to 60 or 70, I would lose count, and I would go back into, the zone where I didn't want to think about swimming for 6.5 hours. All I wanted to do was swim to the next time that I was able to stop, get some water, eat something. And that's what I want to do, because swimming for a half an hour or swimming for 20 minutes, that's manageable. My mind and most people's mind, swimming for a short period of time is totally doable. If I jumped in and said, I'm going to swim constantly for 6.5 hours, or in the case of my competitor, my colleagues who swam for up to 11 hours, thinking I need to swim for 11 hours, that's a little too much. And so we take off bite-sized chunks that is reasonable. And after I had one and I loved it, I actually liked it when I lost count. So in my mind, I would say, okay, I've stopped 3 times. If I'm stopping once every 30 minutes, that 90 minutes has elapsed. Well, I loved it actually when I lost track of how many times we stopped. Was that 7 times, 8 times, or 9 times? And then I said, okay, that's very good. All we're doing is we're swimming to the next feeding, swimming to the next stop.
Yeah. I know that your training sessions were very intense and extreme. Did you suffer from any overuse injuries in the training running up to the actual event?
No, but that was a real definite concern of mine. I do swim, but I don't swim at these distances. And at my age, just turning over your arms so many times, it could definitely lead to an overuse injury. Unfortunately, I was using my own company's technology, Katsu, to both prepare myself to warm up and to recover from each training session. So and that was one of the purposes. I wanted to take my own body, put it through extreme conditions, and see if my own company's technology could help me physiologically. And it came through with flying colors. But that was definitely, one of the goals that I wanted to see for myself. It's one thing to run a test with athletes. It's one thing to ask your employees or your colleagues to do something. It's another thing when you put your own technology to the test with your own body. And that's what I did. And it was quite good. And you asked me before we got on, how am I feeling? I'm completely 100% recovered. And that was a testament to the protocols and the equipment that I was using to help me recover from each day.
Was there a point during the 4 swims when you ran into any difficulties or anything unexpected? And if so, how did you handle those challenges?
Yeah, I was about 4.5 hours into the longest swim on day 3. The first 2 hours, the first hour and a half of that 6.5 hour swim, there was no wind. There was, we had gotten through the cold part, and the lake was very calm, totally tranquil, glassy water. And I said to myself, these conditions, these ideal conditions are not going to last. So under these ideal conditions, I can swim fast. So I wanted to swim fast in order to cover as much distance as I could when the conditions were nice and smooth. And that turned out to be wonderful, because I did get through a bulk of the lake before the oncoming winds came on. And that particular lake really had a lot of people get out, or we call it DNF, did not finish. And they, in contrast to me, I believe, they start out at a good pace or a slower pace, and then we're going to build up. In my case, once I acknowledged that, these conditions are so perfect, I did the opposite. I started to go fast. Well, 4.5 hours in, I just completely bonked. I was swimming well. My arm strokes were good. I was having a nice 4-beat kick. And then it was like a piano was on my shoulders. And I couldn't lift up my head. And I called out to, and my paddler was going at a good pace. And suddenly he was about 10 meters ahead of me. And he looks back and I said, I need to slow down. Well, we had starbursts. We had a little, the race director had given us a Skittles and Starbucks, Starburst candy. And I don't eat candy. I eat chocolate, but I don't eat Starburst and I don't eat Skittles. And I just needed something. My body was spent. It's like you run 25 miles in a marathon and you just completely tie up and bonk. That's where I was. But I was 2 hours from the finish. And there was no way I was getting out. It wasn't that I was going to sink or anything. I was spent. I was just totally spent. And I asked them, I said, you know what? I just need food. Give me whatever you have on the kayak. And he gave me 4 Starbursts. And Starbursts, as you know, they're quite chewy. So I turned over on my back and it took me a while, probably 2 minutes to get all 4 Starbursts down. And I said, let me just swim backstroke for a while. And I probably swam backstroke for, I very specifically told myself, I'm going to do 100 backstroke arm strokes, which I did. And at 100, I told myself, okay, I'm going to go back on my stomach and swim freestyle. And by the time I got to 100 and turned over on my stomach, I was feeling better. Not good, but better. And I didn't go fast. I just had a controlled pace. And about 10 minutes later, that I was like, oh, okay, the lights are turned back on, and I was fine. But I knew that was probably more psychological than physiological. So I told my kayaker, I said, I had another thing in my kayak, and that was a peanut butter and Nutella sandwich. Basically a Reese's peanut butter cup on bread. And then, so I said, let me have that sandwich in the middle of a lake. 4.5 hours, there was nobody around me, and I'm eating a Skippy peanut butter and Nutella on bread. And I downed that. And then I said, okay, I'm going to go 10 breaststroke strokes. And I took 10 breaststroke strokes, and then I was out of it. I pulled out, maybe it was, I just had to have sugar or some kind of carbohydrate, more likely carbohydrate in my body. I needed much more fresh water. I downed a whole bottle of water with that Nutella sandwich and the Starburst. And then I was out. I bonked, I crashed. I was physically spent, but it took me probably 15 minutes, and I was able to regain the pace. And then I swam well for the next 2 hours and finished. That was tough. That was the only real tough point when I said I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to get out, but it was still a long way to the finish. It was 6 miles that I had to swim still. And I was saying, oh, like I should be done in 2 hours. I don't want to be done in 3 hours. And so that was how I got over that. Starburst and Nutella.
That's a great plug for Starburst and Nutella in general.
Yeah.
Now, Steve, how much sleep did you get in between each of the 4 swims? And did you do anything to help your body recover in between swims?
Yeah. So I was sleeping well before the first day. That was great. I was excited. I woke up probably 4 or 5 times in that night. I was hydrating a lot. I don't know exactly how much water I was drinking, but I knew hydration would be key. And I was really hydrating a lot, which led to very frequent urination. So I was waking up in the middle of the night, and that was fine. on day one, I swam well. Day two, we had heard that the water was getting cold, and I was nervous. I probably slept only 3 hours, but in my training, I had purposely not slept before some of my training sessions, or slept very little, in order to prepare my body to be able to swim with minimal sleep. So the second day, it was a tough day, and I did it somewhere between 2 and 3 hours sleep. And that was tough, but I'd experienced that level of fatigue before. The third day was really tough because in order to get to the start of the swim, there were no paved roads. It was just a dirt road, and you go about 10 miles an hour, and your body is, going up and down for an hour. And that's not an ideal way to prepare for a long swim. But in order to prepare for that, I knew that there was this condition. So what I would do is I would walk about 45 minutes to an hour from my home along the shore in Huntington Beach, and then get in the water. So I'd prepared myself before I'd done training to, as close as I could replicate, tire my body out through walking. I mean, walking's not tough, but when you're going to swim for 2 hours, but before you swim for 2 hours in the cold ocean, you're walking for an hour. That's a good way to replicate what I did. And then the last night was fine. I was rather enjoyable, but in between, I was always doing Katsu, our company's technology. I probably did a total of at least 2 hours, maybe 3 hours total of just sitting, resting, and typing emails, etc., in between the swims, when I would flush out the metabolic waste in my muscles. And I felt fine. At the start of every swim, I felt fine. And I did one other thing, and I noticed that swimmers actually commented on this. Every single time I had the ability to sit down, I sat down. Every single time I had ability to lie down, I'd lie down. And we would have a pre-race meeting. There would be a gathering of swimmers, and everybody would be on their feet, and I would be sitting down even if it was concrete, even if it was a driveway. I would put my towel down and I would lay down, and I would participate and listen to conversation. And it was before the second day or third day, I forget, where I remember sitting down and then a lot of the other people decided, we've had enough of this standing bit. And they also either sat down, and I said, hey, when we're doing all these hours of swimming, anytime that we can allow our body to recover, even if it's just sitting as opposed to standing, or lying down as opposed to sitting, we should do it. So that I was just very practical, drinking lots of water, doing our technology, or sitting down and just relaxing. I didn't want to be tense. I wanted my body to be nice and loose. I enjoyed the conversations. I mean, everybody, those swimmers that were there are fascinating people, really fascinating people. So just listening to their conversations was very comforting. It was very enjoyable to listen. One of the swimmers who was there was Sarah Thomas. She is a breast cancer survivor who is the first person to swim 4 times across the English Channel, and just talking to her, just chatting with her, everything from what does she do, in her professional life, to how in the world does she swim 54 hours straight in the English Channel, was unbelievably motivating and comforting to me. So just listening to all of these extreme athletes around, because you see them and you realize they're just normal people. They do extraordinary things, but they're, to the naked eye, they're very ordinary. They're not particularly, built. They're not particularly tall. They're not particularly, anything. Now, they do extraordinary things, that's for sure. And it was very inspirational for me to be around these people and just listen to their small talk. So all of these things added up to being prepared for each and every day.
You had mentioned that the water was cold. You had spoken about the currents. Did you encounter choppy water? And if so, how did you handle that? What
Yeah,
technique?
there was lots and lots and hours of choppy water. And choppy water, for a swimmer, whether you're in the ocean or lake or river, it's very important to have a very good streamlined body position. And in order to do that, you need to kick quite strongly. And so that's what I did. I wanted to maintain a good body position because I didn't want my body position to be bowed like this. Because imagine this is your lower back, then your back would get sore and that would affect you. So I try to keep a very flat body position, even in the choppy water. And I have been doing this for a number of years. So that's my way to keep I didn't have any lower back issues, no stomach issues. My shoulders were, fatigued because of just swimming, but physiologically I was prepared for that. So, but there was choppy water all the time.
Steve, are there any particular life lessons that one can take away from this swim series and from open water swimming in general?
Yeah, I mean, years ago, it's probably 20 years ago, I think, maybe even more, there was a shipwreck. And I got a call from the Wall Street Journal because they knew I was into open water swimming. And there was a reporter wanted to know, why do many people drown so close to shore in a shipwreck? Most shipwrecks happen rather close to shore, other than the Titanic hitting an iceberg in the middle of the North Atlantic. Most shipwrecks happen close to shore. And many people, unfortunately, don't make it to shore. And I did some calculations, talked with some people, and I figured that was, 2.5% of all humanity could swim 500 meters to shore if their life depended on it. So that means 97% of humanity could not swim 500 meters to save their life. Now, maybe I'm off by a factor of 2, maybe I'm accurate, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, swimming in the open water, as opposed to a pool, is a challenging activity. And here I was jumping into a risky, high risk, challenging event purposefully. But I approached every aspect of this challenge with a thoughtful approach. Okay, if the water's cold, how do I acclimate my body to the cold? If the water is choppy, how do I change my stroke or my body position? If I'm going to have to swim for over 6 hours, how do I handle that perception of continuous swimming? How do I handle the hot Arizona heat as opposed to the cool water underneath me? So all of these things, I looked, I thought, I just Googled little things, and I asked my fellow swimmers what they did. I emailed a lot of swimmers who had done this swim before, both those who have failed and those who had succeeded. And I sought advice. And that's exactly what I would do, or what I did when I was a student in college. If I had a math problem or a chemistry project or something, and I just couldn't handle it myself, I reached out primarily to my fellow students, but also to a professor or a TA or somebody. In business, when I can't figure out, how to achieve something, I reach out and ask people who have the experience. I gather information, and I assess whether or not that is a reasonable thing that I can achieve. Fortunately, open water swimming and this event in particular, and most extreme sports events, things don't happen quickly. It's not like a basketball game. It's not like fourth down in the red zone in a football game when things are a matter of seconds. Things happen over the course of minutes and more likely hours, days, weeks. And so that suits my approach. I could do things, I think I can do things better when I have time to seek a problem. If I need to address a problem in the next 10 seconds, that doesn't suit me. Maybe if I was a commodities trader or an auctioneer or somebody, maybe that kind of time pressure suits me, but I'm more long-term. I like to think about a problem and think about different options or solutions and then select one. And so I selected a challenge that suited my own talents. So sometimes, it's good to go play in a backyard, play a game where you write the rules. And very much like, probably college students. If you're good at math, go ahead and take math courses. But if you're not good at math, it's probably better to have other subjects to study. And so the life lessons are, pick your battles well, assess the situation well, give yourself options. I didn't know I would succeed. I did, but I always thought, well, what if this happens? What if my company runs out of capital? What if there's a war in Eastern Europe? What happens to logistics? What has happened to operations? What happens if there is a change in, import, export duties, which happens, all the time with governments and government policies. So, I selected a challenge that I thought was doable, reasonable, but I had to do certain things very strategically. And that's how I approach life in general. And it just suits my personality, suits my thought process, and suits, my personality.
So as full disclosure, I'm an avid user of Katsu training, as you know, of which your company, Katsu Global, provides. I don't pretend to be objective about it. I benefit from it. It helps with my recovery, my much shorter swims than yours. Yeah. But I have to ask you, did you find between swims Katsu to be effective with your recovery? And maybe just to take a step back, in the run-up to the event, what type of Katsu cycle sets did you use in the weeks and months before the competition?
Yeah, so for people who don't know, excuse me, my computer is running out of juice. I'm just gonna plug it in right now.
Sure.
Katsu is basically you put a pneumatic bands around your arms and legs, and it changes the volume of blood in your arms and legs. So when we are exercising, it could be walking, it could be running, swimming, cycling, rowing, what have you, you have good blood flow in your working muscles. So just take a simple example of doing bicep curls. When you do bicep curls, typically your skin tone gets a little red, a little pink, because you're exercising your biceps, your upper arms and your forearms. Katsu just puts pressure for 30 seconds and then pressure off for 30 seconds. And it actually increases the blood flow for 30 seconds. And then when the pneumatic bands are released, then there's a whoosh, then the blood circulation actually removes the lactate, the metabolic waste in the muscles. So as soon as I finished each swim, if I had the tools to do it, I could look at my working muscles, and they were quite flush with blood because I had been swimming for so long. I needed to remove the lactate from my muscles as quickly as possible. The more that you leave the lactate in the muscle, the more sore you are for longer periods of time. So as soon as I got out of the water, I dried off, I put the bands on my arms and then my legs, and I was able to recover. I was able to remove the lactate very quickly, whereas the other swimmers who were there, they did not have that benefit. So let's just say that if I had, I'm just going to say 10 millimoles, which is the unit of measure that of lactate in the human blood. Let's say I had 10 millimoles. I got it down to 2 millimoles very quickly within the matter of 15 minutes. Other swimmers, let's say they had the same amount of lactate in their muscles. They finished the swim, they got to shore, they put their clothes on, they went back to the hotel, they took a warm shower. They still would have a very high level, maybe not 10 millimoles, but maybe 8 millimoles or 6 millimoles of lactate in their muscles. They didn't have the benefit of whooshing or dissipating that lactate in their muscles. And so that becomes a cumulative process. So on the second day, the third day, the fourth day, they're existing or they're trying to exercise with a higher level of lactate in their muscles, whereas I'm going down to, recovery levels, meaning, almost normal levels. So I'm getting a fresh start. It's very much like a NASCAR racer. Every time you go in the pit, you get new tires, oil change, gasoline, fuel, and it's ready to go. Whereas the other people using this NASCAR analogy, they were using the same tires and their fuel tank is getting lower and lower. Whereas my fuel tank was able to be refilled. And that was one of the goals that I had. I wanted to demonstrate to other extreme sports athletes, whether it's a marathon runner, a triathlete, a cyclist, a rower, et cetera, that they could push themselves by a very strategic removal of lactate during exercise or competition.
I want to be mindful of your time, so I just want to ask 2 more questions.
Yeah, probably.
After you were finished with each of these 4 swims, what did you eat to refuel?
So that's one of the challenges of SCAR. We're far, far away from a big city. We're in the Tonto National Forest. A lot of it is owned by Native Americans. I think I saw 2 Starbucks during the time. I saw 1 Walmart, no Costco, no, Albertsons or Ralph supermarkets. So I knew very much that nutrition could be a problem. I must admit, after 2 of the swims, the only thing available was either pizza or a hamburger. I chose to eat both. That's fine. But it isn't probably something that I would have eaten if I would have been in a big city. We existed largely on water, but I knew that going in, and I don't take any supplements or vitamins except for algae tablets. I literally take pure algae supplements. They're little green, they're basically seaweed tablets. And the seaweeds have all the minerals and vitamins. It comes from the sea that the human body needs. And so I was taking a packet of algae tablets in the morning and afternoon. So I knew that even though we would go 4 days potentially without any vegetables or any fruits, no roughage, etc., that my body was being replenished by algae tablets that had all of the nutrients that I needed to perform at my best. So, I knew that going in that food would be an issue. My dinner the second night was at a Circle K, And my dinner on the third night was a little truck stop with chicken salad on white bread and I think it was a Haagen-Dazs ice cream. So, but I had my algae tablet. So that's how I got around that problem. Again, this is another challenge of the swim. We're not, we're far away from civilization, not civilization. We're far away from modern retail shopping. And so I worked that problem by bringing my minerals and vitamins via algae tablets.
And then lastly, do you have any plans for any additional swims?
Yes, there's 2 other swims that I want to do this coming summer. Both swims have never been done before. I haven't solved all of the logistical issues yet. And so, but that's part of the enjoyment of what I'm going to attempt. I have to solve the logistic problems of getting from start to finish safely. So I'll be exploring how to do that. I assess the situation. We're going to be out in the ocean, and I need to figure out how best to get from point A to point B safely in one piece. And it will involve everything from putting on a shark deterrent to different forms of communication, different forms of, and so I have sought the assistance of the fishing community, Navy SEALs. I've sought the advice of naval personnel who understand what happens when people are in shipwrecks or lost at sea. So it's very fascinating to me how much knowledge is out there. I just have to find the right experts.
Well, Steve Munatones, all fascinating accounts. Thank you for taking the time to share with us about your experiences with the SCAR Swim Series. Again, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's been a real privilege speaking with you about your victory. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted.